There's things happening on Twitter and I have very strong opinions, so this is what we're doing. Hello everyone and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Before we go any further, show of the week, A Man of No Importance. Topical show title, but also a genuinely really good show, so go check it out. There will be links below. But today I just wanted to quickly come onto the YouTubes to talk about I mean, there's so many things to talk about, isn't there? But specifically, I wanted to talk about the Times piece that was published, I think today when I'm filming this. What's the date today? The 16th. I think it was published on the 16th. It might have been yesterday on the 15th. The article published in the Times about how apparently the wrong theatres are getting funding from the government. But I want to make the argument, and I'm probably preaching to the choir, as to why that article is just plain wrong, and that the right theatres are actually getting the funding if we want to actually help our industry and as many people in our industry as possible. So this is probably going to be a bit of a short one because it's very warm and this is very spontaneous. I was just too mad to not say something, so yeah. I haven't been able to actually read the Times article, just as a disclaimer, because it's behind a paywall and your girl is broke. So literally just looking at the title of this article makes me mad. I've managed to read the beginning of the article because that's not behind a paywall, so like the first 3 paragraphs. But just so you know, as a disclaimer, because of the paywall, I haven't been able to fully read the article. But judging from the first few paragraphs, it seems that the crux of the argument is that the West End theatres should be given priority for funding, rather than smaller theatres, regional theatres, touring theatres, art centres, etc, etc, etc. I'm going to explain why I think that doesn't make any sense. And I'm saying this as someone who was working at a West End theatre when this whole shutdown happened, as someone who knows lots of people who were in West End shows when the shutdown happened. I say this being well aware that the lack of help for West End theatres does affect people. It's probably going to affect whether I'm going back to work anytime soon or if I have to find another job. Like, I understand that the West End does provide a lot of jobs for a lot of people, and there are a lot of people who were working in the West End, myself included, who are now in limbo because of the lack of help for West End theatres specifically, and the general lack of comparative help that the arts have received overall during this crisis. So I get that. I'm not someone here being like, the West End, no one cares. In my opinion, what we as an industry should be doing is looking at what help we can get or what help we can give to ourselves and saying, how can we make this benefit the most people in our industry? And this is why actually helping out regional theatres, art centres, the touring theatres, those venues, smaller venues, is actually going to help more people than helping the West End venues. I made some notes on my phone. The West End, which isn't even all of the theatres in London, they're just the theatres in the West End of London, in Theatreland if you will, consists of 39 theatres. Now that might sound like a lot, especially if you're talking about one area of one city, but in the grand scheme of things it isn't. The Theatre Trust, I think it's the UK Theatre Trust, or it might just be the Theatre Trust, but anyway, it's an organisation. They estimate that in the UK there are more than 1,100 active theatres, and there are almost 4,000 theatre buildings. 39 compared to that number is not a lot. Now you might say, yeah, but you can't help absolutely every single theatre, so why not prioritise the West End? For those of you who don't know, West End theatres cost a lot of money to maintain. They are old buildings, they have large running costs. Earlier this year, Sonia Freeman wrote a blog post about this, and she said that a West End theatre costs, I believe, about £30,000 a week to just maintain, whereas a small art centre that was built 10 years ago is going to cost way less to maintain. Also, smaller art centres or regional theatres, if they are physically smaller, if they have smaller teams, they cost less upkeep in wages for the people who are working inside them. So the same amount of money that you would put into however many West End theatres, that same amount of money could most likely help more regional theatres, art centres, fringe theatres, pub theatres, etc. across the country. So that's the first thing. Cost-wise, you help out more buildings and more organisations helping the regions and smaller venues than you do helping West End theatres. That's just basic maths. West End theatres are more expensive to help. They need more money to help them. So you might be thinking, okay, well, yeah, West End theatres need more money to upkeep the buildings, but they hire a lot of people, right? So it would be worth it. Like all those people who are in Wicked and Les Mis and Phantom and Come From Away and Hamilton, like if we help those theatres, we're saving those jobs. That is true. But also West End theatres have a way lower job turnover and create less jobs than the regions do. Any given West End show is going to have usually a low turnover. This is because West End shows tend to have longer runs than shows in the regions. Usually if you get a short run in a West End, it's because it was designed to have a short run. Maybe it's popping in because there was a dark period in a theatre or something like that. By and large, you're looking at show runs of at least 6 months, and with long running West End shows, I'm sure you're aware, they've run for years and years and years. The way that works with casting is that when you're hired for a West End show, unless it's new and they don't know if it will last more than 6 months, typically you'd be signing a contract as an actor for a year. Only one company of actors is being hired for a whole year in that one theatre. With the crew, the backstage crew, I don't know as much about this, but from what I understand from talking to the backstage crew at the theatre where I was working, you have some crew that is hired by the theatre, so they are there the whole time. They're kind of permanent-ish staff of the theatre. But then also a company that's coming in with a show, hiring the theatre, will have their own members of crew. And my understanding is usually the members of the crew that are attached to the show tend to stick around on the show. Unless they want to move on, they can kind of stay. And it's the same with the actors as well. They sign a contract for a year, but oftentimes that contract is offered up for renewal when it's coming to cast change. I think there must be times when there are some actors where they're like, yeah, we're not letting you renew your contract, but my understanding is that is not the norm. Usually if you've done a good job in your contract, they will offer it to you again to renew. So you can have actors that stay in shows for years and years and years and years, and again, that means that there are less jobs for other people to come into because a lot of the cast may be choosing to stay. And then on top of that, you've got the fact that, you know, with one long-standing show, it's one director, one choreographer, one producer. You might have associates, but that's only like one extra job each, and that's it. And the longer that show is in, the less and less and less there are more jobs coming into that theatre. And then on top of that, the auxiliary jobs that are created, the front of house jobs, the management jobs, jobs in maintenance and cleaning and things like that, those jobs are centralised in London. 39 theatres, and all of those jobs are in London, in central London. Obviously London's a big city. I'm not saying London doesn't need the jobs. There are people in London who need to work. We're not all bankers. But all of that workforce is centralised to one city. Now let's compare that to a regional theatre or a small art centre or something like that, something outside of London. Regional venues have a higher turnover of shows. On even the large regional venues on the touring circuit, a tour will only be in for a couple of weeks, and then a new show, whether that's a new tour or a touring concert or some other event, will come in to that venue. With small art centres and things like that, it's the same. They'll have a show, maybe a small tour of, I don't know, someone's one-person show that they're touring around small venues. They will perform in that venue for a week, and then the next thing will come in. And if those venues produce something in-house, for example, a lot of those kind of venues will produce their Christmas show in-house, that will again only be for a few weeks, and then the next thing will come in. So assuming that the companies that are coming in, everyone is being paid, that is kind of creating more jobs by having a venue there to be like you can come and perform at our venue. That is already creating more performance and creative jobs, because not only, of course, every venue would have their in-house crew, but if the show has their own kind of crew, personal crew people, stage management, backstage staff, their cast, let's say it's a cast of 5, their own producer, whoever's producing it, their own director, whoever's directing it. This is kind of an exaggerated example, but let's say a venue has a new show every week. That's 52 new companies that are coming in and performing in that venue. And even if they're just small companies with, let's say, 10 paid people involved in that thing, that's 520 people that venue has made a job for. And that's just in one venue. That's just in one regional venue. Amplify that to however many regional venues you could support with any government funding during this crisis. Hi there, Mead from the editing room with terrible lighting. One of the things that I didn't mention is also in the regions and in smaller theatres, there are way more opportunities for writers. Writers don't really get a looking in the West End. The West End tends to be, at the moment at least, transfers from Broadway or very, very established writers writing new work. So if you're a new or emerging writer, that's where you're going to get your work, is in the regions. Okay, bye. If we compare that to West End theatres, assuming that every West End cast is a cast of 15, all 39 theatres create 585 jobs. Just on stage with the actors. So that's not counting crew, obviously it'll be a little bit more than that, but that's over 39 theatres. So that's the first thing. More actors, more creatives, more stage crew, stage managers can find jobs in the regions than on the West End. There are more jobs for everyone in the regions than in the West End. So that's the first thing. And secondly, if we look at those auxiliary jobs again, those auxiliary jobs are going out into a wider range of communities. If you were to help 39 theatres across the country, you would be helping 39 different communities of people all across the UK. If you just helped the 39 theatres in the West End, you're just helping people in London. Other things that I think are just general things that I may sprinkle in, I don't know, because I don't have notes for this bit, but I just need to say it because I'm mad and I'm pissed. Who goes to see shows in the West End by and large? Tourists. Everyone I know who has ever been to New York on holiday or whatever has always been like, you have to go and see a Broadway show. With London it's the same. Any tourist who is coming to London, and that's like a big trip for them, would be like, you have to go and see a West End show. Tourism makes up a huge demographic of West End audiences. UK audiences are kind of secondary. I think there's probably a lot of reasons for that. I'm not an economist or anything, but I do think ticket prices have a big thing to do with that. Not just ticket prices of the shows, ticket prices of trains for travel, the costs of food, if you have to come a long way and you've got to buy a meal. Working front of house, a lot of the people from the UK, like domestic tourists coming to see West End shows, they were coming for an occasion because of the expense. And because of that, West End theatre, I don't think, is that accessible to British people. And we're living in a time when tourism is kind of not a viable option at the moment, unless you can risk being put on a quarantine list for when you come back and you can miss an extra 2 weeks of work. I don't think there's going to be a lot of tourists coming to the West End for the next few months to a year at the very least. I just don't think it's going to happen. There are a lot of people already. We've seen it when we as a community were begging the government to help us and do something, and tweeting Rishi Sunak and tweeting Oliver Dowden and tweeting Boris Johnson being like, help us, and you'd see the replies of people thinking that we were just being spoiled rich kids, brats that just wanted money to fund our glorified hobby. That's what a lot of people's opinion of the arts is, and putting all of our resources into the West End rather than local theatres that actually can create jobs in the local community, can actually provide art and entertainment for the local community, can actually fill in gaps that are lacking in services in the local community. Theatre clubs for young people, arts groups for older people, things that the social services haven't been able to provide because they've been whittled down so much for decades of underfunding. That's going to make people care about the arts, and that's going to make people, when they can, come back to the West End, because you know what? Their local theatre got funding. They couldn't really go anywhere because of COVID. They found these facilities, these communities, this entertainment. They were able to support their own, and they were like, actually, this seems kind of cool. And then when the economy picks up again, when everything picks up again, no matter how far into the future that may be, they may then be like, you know what, theatre is something that is for me. I'll go down to London and see a show. Concentrating on the West End to me just seems so closed-minded. A Twitter account called JBR Agent, that's what he says his name is, so I'll just call him JBR. He posted a thread which I absolutely agreed with, and in the last tweet in the thread he said this: "We need to build wide before we build high. Saving the juggernauts of the West End is the ideology of trickle-down economics, and as we have seen over the last few decades, it does not work. This is why a handful of people at the top are billionaires and everyone else struggles." That is so true. To me, it's the rhetoric of a person who cares more about their business and making money than they do about the actual industry that made them, which is sad because a lot of the big players in our theatre economy, like, I've seen the documentaries about how they started out and like them remortgaging houses because they believed in a show and the artistic feats they were able to achieve. I don't think these people started off not caring about theatre. I think right at the beginning of their careers they probably would have been the people being like, no, we've got to help artists, we've got to make sure that artists have jobs, the money can go further at the smaller venues. But now, because they're millionaires and billionaires, they don't care, and it's just frustrating for me. And it's frustrating for a lot of people, and I think those people who voice their frustrations get shot down quite a lot. This article is a blatant display of the fact that in the arts not everyone is as altruistic as we would want them to be, or that we hope that they would be. I think when you're, you know, at the bottom, it's easier to be kind and to help people when you can, because you want that to be reciprocated on yourself. When you're at the top looking down and you don't need people to be kind to you because you've made it, so, you know, you don't need that help, it's hard to empathize with the people who do need the help, I think. I think that's just what happens in our society nowadays, not just in the arts, I think just everywhere. Certain big players in our industry are probably looking at all the small people who are trying to get their foot in the door, get their seat at the table, and being like, you're just not trying hard enough, are you? And then they go and turn around and be like, but you don't deserve help, we deserve help more than you do. It's interesting, but I just think that's an important thing for us to bear in mind. A lot of the big players, even if they're doing things that in the grand scheme of things will probably have a net benefit to our industry, like raising awareness or whatever, they're still not in the position where they would want to change the status quo because they've benefited and continue to benefit from the status quo. I personally believe, this is my hypothesis, that if the regions were stronger, if support for actual artists was stronger, the industry as a whole would have been more robust. And I think this is a problem that is the result of decades of underfunding and dismantling the foundations of our industry till only the top was left. We were building high and all the wideness has been slowly chipped away. The foundations have been chipped away, and now we're in a position where we're wobbling and the money needs to go to the foundations. We need to build wide, we need to make a stable base, and the people who, you know, are going to be dark for a while and are not going to be making money for a while and have to chip away at their billions don't want to do that, and then all that's going to happen is that the whole thing is going to topple over. So yeah, those are my opinions. The whole premise of the piece just feels very self-centered, very self-serving, and completely disregarding the vast majority of our industry. And I don't think that's cool. So that is this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I don't know if enjoyable is the adjective I'd use, but there we go. If you did enjoy this video, please consider liking and subscribing. Would love to have you. Stay tuned for more theatre content from a UK perspective, and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye friends!